Hello there and welcome once again to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues, and we welcome back an old friend today.
Yes, I'm glad you said it that way. It's just exactly what I was thinking. An old friend in the form of Robert McCampbell, a lawyer now practicing with the Feller-Snyder firm, a former partner of mine and a good friend of mine. We officed right next door to each other for a number of years. He's going to come talk, he's also been a federal prosecutor, but we're going to talk to him today about the hoopla that's going on about the government seizing telephone records, email records, with or without authority, and the FISA court, the court that supervises such activities by the government. Robert can give us the straight information about what's going on and how it's regulated, and do we need it?
Yeah. Robert McCampbell, today's guest on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
A doctorate in American Indian Studies and Comparative Cultural and Literary Studies. I focus on Native American arts and especially representations of American Indians. My name is Tracy Morris, and I am an educator, a scholar, and a business owner, and I am Chickasaw. I'm extremely interested in how Natives have been represented in the media and how we represent ourselves in the media. We have a unique opportunity right now with broadband and with new media. It's an open playing field. I do believe that it gives us a power to represent ourselves and a power to change our own destiny. Anybody with a cell phone, with a good phone, and an idea and a computer can go out and make a movie. For the first time, we can represent ourselves. We can tell our own stories, and to be seen for who we are now, not the victims of the past, I think is tremendously exciting. That's where my work lies.
People have been talking about energy independence for a long time. It's always been popular, but today it's possible.
We have an enormous supply of oil and gas in the United States, much more than we thought just a few years ago.
New technology, massive new discoveries, largely made by Oklahoma companies. It literally changes everything.
And Oklahoma is leading the charge. Go watch this video to see why. Energy independence starts with us.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
It's always a pleasure to have guests on The Verdict. We wouldn't do much if we weren't able to have guests to give to you, but today's a particular pleasure because we're bringing back to The Verdict for his fifth appearance a longtime friend of mine, a former partner of mine, an office mate almost of mine for a number of years, Robert McCampbell. Robert did his undergraduate work at Vanderbilt University, did his law work at Yale University, has now been practicing law privately, or in the law practice, I should say, some private, some public, for 30 years. He has a wonderful mix of federal prosecution practice along with private practice. He's now with the law firm of Feller-Snyder in Oklahoma City and Tulsa, a very fine, large, well-equipped law firm, and he adds much to it. He was the United States Attorney in the Western District of Oklahoma from 2001 to 2005, where he served with distinction. He is a former co-host of The Verdict for several shows a number of years back. We're just glad to get you back. Robert, nice to have you, and glad to have you talk about what you're going to talk about.
Well, it's always great to be here.
Yeah, and it's been too long since you've been on the show, so get us up to date. What have you been working on?
Well, practicing law and kids growing up. My daughter graduated from college, started a job in Washington, D.C. My son's getting ready to start his junior year at the University of Texas. That's very exciting. In addition to practicing law, Governor Fallon's appointed me chairman of the Public Employee Relations Board, so I've been spending some time on that. And my wife, Donna, just finished her term as chairman of the Oklahoma City Zoo Trust, working with Mayor Mick and others in Oklahoma City, and that's been a big responsibility for her, but she's really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Well, we're not going to ask you this on the air. I'll ask you off the air, but I don't know how you remain so young looking. You haven't changed a bit since you came to the firm 30 years ago, but Welcome back. Glad to have you.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how your mix of public experience as a federal prosecutor and private practice has equipped you to continue in the private practice in ways that perhaps others cannot.
Well, I have had the luxury of being able to bounce back and forth between private practice and public practice. So plenty of time in private practice, 7 years as an assistant U.S. attorney, and then in a later stint going back 4 years as U.S. attorney. I'd been in office a month when the 9/11 attacks happened, and of course the U.S. Attorney's Office and everybody else in law enforcement, our mission was immediately transformed, and spent a lot of time working with classified information, working with the Anti-Terrorism Task Force, and working with the Patriot Act in particular, helping to protect, which we all needed to do then, against foreign terrorists. One of the really interesting things that happened during that period, there were about 20 districts that were involved in the investigation coming out of 9/11. Our district was one of them because of the activity at the Norman Flight School, you'll recall. So I was in a meeting in Washington with George Tenet, who was CIA director at the time, and we were talking about how this had transformed our mission. And what he said then, he says, you know, as we start thinking about how we're going to protect ourselves against terrorism and the interplay with civil liberties and privacy interests, he says, I think it's going to take us about 10 years to figure out where on that spectrum we want to be. Well, here we are, still having that debate, and it's a healthy debate about where do we want to be between protecting ourselves but also watching out for privacy interests.
We've seen recently a good bit of publicity about the government gathering telephone data on people making cell phone calls and the like. Can you tell us what is really going on in regard to telephone information, and why is it necessary, and how do we respond to the folks that say you're spying on us?
Yeah, the truth is it's much ado about nothing. The first thing is there have been some kind of hysterical articles suggesting that the government's listening in on people's telephone calls, and that's not happening. They're gathering what the government refers to as metadata, which merely tells which phone numbers are calling which other phone numbers. To give you a sense of how insignificant this is, there's more information about you in the phone book. So if you have a listed phone number, there's more information out there than what is contained in the metadata. The metadata can be important, though, in the enforcement context, in helping put together pieces of who's contacting who, and as we all discussed after 9/11, connecting the dots. And so the program here, if it were an ordinary criminal case, you just issue a grand jury subpoena. There wouldn't be any process at all other than have an assistant U.S. attorney issue a grand jury subpoena and gather people's telephone bills. Routinely happens in a regular criminal case. When it comes to a terrorism investigation, then you do have to go through the FISA court. You do have to show there's reasonable, articulable suspicion that this material is related to a terrorism investigation. But there are lots of safeguards in place. So there's only 22 people at the NSA who have the right kind of clearance and who can query this data and find out what's in there. Edward Snowden is not one of them.
You anticipated my question.
There's no other use of the data is allowed. It's all kept within the intelligence community, and the program has been reviewed multiple times by multiple judges at the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. So 14 different judges have approved this program over the years.
Let me stay with that a minute. I heard testimony on Capitol Hill through the television set, of course, talking about this gathering of this data, and the fellow testifying said that one of the big criticisms of the government intelligence folks in 9/11 was that they didn't connect the dots. If we take this away, this takes away the dots. It takes away, it just makes it all immediately impossible to connect the dots in the future if you don't have the dots to connect.
It's exactly what's happening. So before 9/11, they actually had information. They were listening in calls in Yemen. There's a Al-Qaeda safe house in Yemen. They intercepted 7 telephone calls. They knew that somebody is contacting that Al-Qaeda safe house. They did not have the metadata. If they had had the metadata, what they would have found out is there's a guy in San Diego. They could have gone and just picked him up. Well, that guy turns out to be, he was one of the hijackers. And they simply did not have the metadata, could not connect those dots before 9/11. The 9/11 Commission said, sensibly, we need to be doing this. As Senator Lindsey Graham said, if we're not doing this, we're crazy. And he's right.
You know, we live in an era, though, where we're dealing with information and how much should be available. I think it was Mark Zuckerberg, the Facebook creator and CEO, who said, the age of privacy is over. And, you know, for people of my generation, you know, we're used to some level of expectation of privacy. I suspect the next generation has less of an expectation of privacy, but how do we deal with this when some would say everything ought to be made public, including government records?
Yeah, there is definitely a trade-off there, and as technology is advanced, we need to adjust. But there's still some basic principles you can look for. For example, if you share it with a third person, it's not private anymore. So if you think about our telephone conversations with each other, what we're saying to each other is private. The fact that we've talked to each other is not. We all know our telephone provider keeps track of those calls and how many minutes they take, and they're charged against our plan. And the law has been very clear for years that if you're sharing it with a third party, you're not expecting it to be private anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's get to a break and come back, because there's been a lot of stories in the news about people sharing government files and government information, and should they be considered traitors? Is this treasonous? Should they be convicted? Should they be brought back to this country and tried? Robert McCampbell, I suspect, has some opinions on that, and we'll be dealing with that on The Verdict coming after this.
When you have something important to communicate, it becomes clear that there's a lot of competition for your audience's attention. So how can your message stand out and actually resonate with your audience? Legal Graphics has the answers. The team at Legal Graphics will work with you to plan, design, and even test your presentation to ensure your message will be heard and remembered. Call Legal Graphics today to schedule an appointment. The readiness is all.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers. We're visiting with Robert McCampbell today. Talk to us about the PRISM program.
The PRISM program is PRISM, like glass kind of prism.
Yeah, PRISM.
SM. Another program through the National Security Agency, and this program is collecting computer information, including email in some contexts, in foreign terrorist investigations. So the first distinction to understand there is it's targeting non-U.S. persons, meaning not a U.S. citizen and not legally in the United States. And when you're looking at foreign intelligence gathering, keep in mind that until 1978, it was not regulated at all. So if you think about World War II, for example, we intercepted Japanese signals, and we just did it. There was no FISA court, there's no due process, you just do it. because it protects you against your foreign enemies. Well, in 1978, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act was passed to say we're going to have some process, and there are. So first, if you're an intelligence agency, you have to get the Department of Justice on board, and they have to approve this. Then you have to go to the FISA court, and they have to approve it, and you have to show them that it's reasonably related to a bona fide foreign intelligence investigation and that you're looking at information from non-U.S. persons. So there's plenty of process there and safeguards.
And when did that first start, did you say?
It was 1978.
So we've gone through Democratic administrations and Republican administrations with this program still in place.
Absolutely. It's been out there the whole time, and obviously a lot more attention paid to it since 9/11. Okay. There's a columnist for the Financial Times, Pratap Banu Mehta, and she criticized the program, saying that, well, it discriminates in favor of Americans and against foreign people. And the answer is, well, of course, the point of the program is to protect us against our foreign enemies. That is how it works.
Now, some would say that the FISA court is rubber stamping almost any request that comes to it. Is that the case?
Yeah, and I think that's very misleading. There are statistics out there that the FISA court does approve almost all of the applications that get to it. But there's a lot going on before that. The first thing that happens, they get what's called a read copy of the application.
Can I interrupt you and
Yes.
ask you to take a couple of steps back and give our viewers, before we get into that process,
Yes.
a little explanation about the FISA court
The
itself.
FISA court, yeah. Under the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, FISA, there's set up a FISA court, and it's 11 district judges selected by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, and they are cleared for national security information, and they hear these things. And they pick people who are very distinguished and excellent jurists. One of them right now is Claire Egan from Tulsa, Oklahoma, a district judge there, who's a very accomplished judge. Judge Ralph Thompson from Oklahoma City was on the FISA court for many years. So that's the court that hears it. And so the court gets first what's called a read copy of the application. It's not the official copy. The court and their staff, they look at that, and there's interaction there, and they're saying, no, we need more about this, or we need more explanation, we don't understand this. And so there's a back and forth process. The other thing that happens is when it gets to the official time to issue the order, in recent years, over 80% of the time, the court does not issue the order that it's asked to issue. The court makes its own decision and modifies those orders.
How many?
In some
What
sections.
percentage?
Over 80% of the time in recent years. So the court, as an independent branch of government, really is exercising oversight on what's happening.
Well, so the application would be, I want to, hypothetically, I want to get the email data that's coming from X to Y, or X, wherever X is sending it. And that's what the court would be looking at to see whether or not there's been a showing that that is something that ought to happen.
Exactly. Or the typical application, you'd ask for multiple things. You might have 10 email addresses you're interested in, and the court might say, you know what, there's only 8 of these that I think really qualify. I'm only going to approve 8 of them. That kind of interaction.
So there's absolutely no rubber stamping as such.
Quite to the opposite.
No.
Do we need these data collection procedures? Are all these things necessary?
I think it's just critical for us. There have been, since 9/11, there have been 42 terrorist plots that have been interrupted worldwide, and over 90% of the time, part of that investigation has come out of Section 2 of the FISA Act, which is where the PRISM program comes from. Same thing, over 90% of the terrorist attacks which have been disrupted use Section 215 information, Section 215 of the Patriot Act, which is where the telephone metadata comes from. And so it's been really important for us. And we've got to keep our eye on the ball. I mean, if you look at what's happening, Al-Qaeda, they bombed the World Trade Center twice, they bombed the Pentagon, they bombed the USS Cole, they bombed our embassy in Kenya, our embassy in Tanzania. Early August, we had to actually close 22 of our embassies because of the threat from Al-Qaeda. That's just one terrorist organization. We've got to protect ourselves from them.
Would you kind of put in your potentate hat on, would you suggest any changes to what's going on right now, either broadening or limiting what collection of data processes?
I do not think we need to limit the data collection process. I think there'd be some value to having more transparency, not about the data are secret, but about the process that's used. I think there's so much misunderstanding that you feel like it's just some guy in Washington with a computer that can do whatever he wants. That's not what it's like at all. All three branches of government are looking at this very carefully. If you look at the telephone data, there were only 300 applications last year for telephone data. So I think more transparency about the kind of safeguards that are in place would be valuable.
What about the so-called whistleblowers who are releasing government information to the media and others?
Yeah, I don't think they're whistleblowers at all. If you look at Edward Snowden, for example, he's a traitor, he's a criminal, he's deserving of long-term incarceration.
What was his motive?
You know, he wants to disclose this, and the evidence is out there that he took the job at NSA already planning to disclose this, and I don't know what his motive is. And we've got a 29-year-old high school dropout who's making these decisions about what ought to be public and what ought to not be public.
Well, in this
and we
case,
can't have that.
Wasn't it a contractor? So, I mean, he wasn't technically even working for the United States
wasn't
government.
even working.
Should he have been exposed to this type of information to begin with?
Clearly not. But what he was exposed to is not the underlying data. He never did have access to that, but he was exposed to some of the training materials and some of the other things. He's definitely not a whistleblower. The government of the United States encourages whistleblowers, and there's actually legal protection for whistleblowers. The Community Intelligence Whistleblower Protection Act actually provides legal protection for whistleblowers. And there's lots of things you can do if you think the government's violating the law. You can report up within your agency, but if you don't want to do that because it's the same agency, you go to the compliance department within the agency. If you don't want to do that, you want to be independent, go to the Inspector General, who's a completely independent office. If you want to go completely outside the agency, you can go to the Department of Justice. If you want to get completely outside the executive branch, you go to the House Intelligence Committee or the Senate Intelligence Committee. There are a whole lot of options out there, but disclosing classified information is not one of the options. It's a crime.
About 1 minute to go. What's next in this area?
Well, clearly Al-Qaeda has not Al-Qaeda still wants to attack us, and they still want to kill Americans, and we still have to protect ourselves from them. The managing how we're going to deal with new technology is going to continue to be a struggle for us. The technology continues to change. The FISA Act, when it was first written, was written with the assumption that telephones plugged into the wall and were located in a specific location, for example. We'll continue to struggle, but I think continue to balance it and clearly watch out for our country.
All right. Robert McCampbell, thanks very much for coming on The Verdict.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks so much for having me.
You bet. Kent and I'll have a final word when we return.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, each child deserves all the quality assistance and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
I think for us, once we got started and we began to see the tremendous need just within our state, it really was just a calling for us. The blessings far outweigh any obstacles that we've faced.
You will always be mom and dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information. And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCampbell Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCampbell Report online.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett and Kent Myers wrapping up a show with Robert McCampbell. We talked about a lot of different subjects, but I can remember my own personal opinions. After 9/11, you start to realize just how vulnerable you are to outside agencies who might want to attack you. And I suspected in my own mind that we might be seeing these events, if not annually, maybe even more frequently. And I've got to hand it to, our federal government has done a pretty good job of exposing these plots and suppressing them.
Well, they do indeed, and they suppress a lot more than they tell us about, I think, which is fine with me, just as long as it doesn't happen is what I'm concerned about. And they seem to be doing a much better job of, as they would put it, connecting the dots. I think probably the last thing the government needs to be doing is have the ability to collect the dots taken from it, as long as they're acting responsibly under the supervision of very prestigious federal judges appointed by this Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. That's pretty good supervision over what's happening.
But the question is, what's next? Will they be listening to our phone calls? Will they be monitoring our email? Will they be monitoring a conversation over the backyard fence with some super sensitive listening device? Will they be flying drones over our backyards taking pictures of us? Can they take a picture of us inside of our house with infrared? We can all come up with a scenario where we say that's going too far. Yeah. And I think part of the discussion is what's going too far. How do they protect us?
Yeah, well, it's a difficult balance, as Robert said in his segment. One thing I failed to mention about Robert is his premier reputation as a lawyer in this area as well as in election law. He just does a grand job.
Well, we have some website information. You can see more about Robert and his firm at fellersnyder.com. That's an Oklahoma City and Tulsa firm. And we have a website too. We'd love you to visit our website. Tell us about a guest you'd like to see on an upcoming edition of The Verdict, or tell us about a topic that you'd like to see us discuss. Our website is theverdict.tv. That's theverdict.tv. We will see you next week right here on The Verdict.